FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome. You are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz. It's 1/28/20. Month is almost over. Maybe humanity as well. Have you heard about the coronavirus? Of course you have. Are you wondering about it? What effect is it going to have? So far, well, John Rubino's got his own theories about this. We should mention. What are your theories? We'd like to know. And you can email us at kl@kerrylutz.com. John, so we all going to die here? I mean, this thing looks pretty serious. I think what the seriousness really is we don't know enough about it, the coronavirus, to know what the effects are going to be. Is it going to be a global pandemic like the flu of 1917, which took out millions of people all across the world? There's all sorts of theories. Is this a militarized virus, or is it naturally occurring? You know, these things do naturally occur, but it's certainly something for all of us to be concerned about, isn't it?
Well, we've really created the conditions in which pandemics are probable rather than possible. You know, we're jamming people into gigantic cities where everybody's breathing the same air, and we have a global economy where people are flying back and forth between big cities all over the place, and we're misusing antibiotics, which is creating these superbugs that are immune to current technology. You know, so something bad was always going to happen, and whether this is the thing, you know, whether this is the big one, who knows? But it looks pretty scary at the moment because this particular virus is contagious before the symptoms show up. So it's really hard to, for instance, screen people in an airport, where what they do now is they have temperature sensors, and if somebody has a fever, they get looked at by the customs people. But you can be contagious for a few days before you have a fever with this thing. So people are just traveling all over the world, presumably, who are infected with this bug, which means we really don't know how big it's going to get and how widespread. But it's already having an impact out there. You know, China is pretty much on lockdown right now. They've got cities bigger than New York City where nobody's allowed to come and go. You can't leave these cities if you're there in China right now. And that was probably a case of locking the barn door after the horse is already gone because of the fact that people don't seem sick right away with this thing. So they're out there in the world, and we'll see. You know, it looks like it could be serious. It doesn't look like it's not like the bubonic plague or something like that, where you get it and you die, or the flu in the 1920s, which attacked the young and the healthy more aggressively than it attacked the old and the very young and the infirm. But it's still, you know, something that's potentially really serious. Now, the financial and economic impact of something like this could be huge because we have a globalized economy. You know, supply chains are global. They aren't just in one country. You know, and the iPhone, for instance, requires a lot of different stuff from a lot of different countries in order to make that product. And most cars, most other computer-related stuff are kind of in the same boat. You know, you've got to mine things in one place and then process the ore in another place, and then bring together a bunch of different components in another place where they assemble them and then ship them to where they're sold. And that's just how this economy works, which makes it very vulnerable to stuff like this. Because if you have to shut down air traffic, which is what you would do in an extreme case. In other words, we wouldn't have people flying in and out of Vancouver or Los Angeles or Seattle if there's a huge pandemic originating in Asia, that shuts down the supply chains of a lot of important products in the economy. So you'd see a huge financial hit.
Yeah.
But the second effect is that the central banks of the world would respond with extremely aggressive monetary policy and much lower interest rates. We already saw the amount of negative yielding debt in the world jump by over $1 trillion just in this past week.
Wow.
Because
really?
Interest rates started to plunge as people got more and more worried about this pandemic. Now, let this thing turn into the real thing, into a major issue for a lot of different countries. And you would see central banks just go wild on the easy money front.
They have no choice.
Yeah, they would see themselves as having no choice because, that's their only tool. So no matter what happens in the world that's bad going forward, we're going to cut interest rates. That's the only thing we have left to respond to stress in our world right now. So one way or another, either if we get along fine until the next recession, we would still have negative interest rates all over the world when that recession hits because central banks normally cut interest rates in a downturn. And the fact that interest rates are already very low isn't going to stop them from cutting rates. They're just going to go negative. So the question becomes, is that more important? Is negative interest rates more important from the standpoint of stimulating economic growth than a viral pandemic is in depressing economic growth? So we got these two really titanic forces out there, and it isn't clear ahead of time which would win because we've never been here before. We've never had a globalized economy facing a real pandemic, and every major central bank in the world with a unlimited printing press and already zero to negative interest rates in a lot of places. So this is new, and it's bad on both counts. Neither one of these things is good, but we're going to see them combine in the not too distant future, possibly in ways that are unpredictable. It could send everything out of control, or it could give us this weird kind of Twilight Zone-y sense of normality when negative 3% interest rates offset the fact that thousands of people are dying and airports are being shut down all over the world. And things just kind of go on, because that's really what the last decade was like. We're not normal. The world was grossly indebted, on the verge of a near-death experience, and we cut interest rates to the point and increased the money supply to the point that the economy seemed to behave normally. Stock prices went up, home prices went up, people got hired, and the fact that we had to borrow tens of trillions of dollars to get that result was lost on most people. Most people think that times are more or less normal. We could have that again, but the cost would be at just insane levels of debt. And because of that, I feel like there's probably some kind of a limiting factor out there. There's a wall that we hit when we're taking on more and more and more debt, cutting interest rates further and further. We don't know where that wall is, but if it's out there, what happens next will bring us closer to that wall. So we'll see. But crazy times. Once again.
Yeah, once again, still. And like you said, I think the average person out there, Joe Sixpack on the street, believes that we're back to normal, that everything is fine now. Jobs. I mean, you have to admit the job market is, compared to what it's been for the last decade, much better. People can get jobs. I got an email from a guy who said that he's basically a Bernie. He's in favor of Bernie because Trump's policies, all they've done is help the top corporations, the top 1%. It has helped working people, blue collar workers, but he's a retiree, and he feels that it hasn't done anything for me as a retiree. Hey, do you see his point of view on that?
Well, yeah, if you're a retiree, the system is skewed against you because presumably you retired with the idea that you were going to get 6% or so on your bank CDs and your bond funds, and you were going to be able to live off that income. But under new age monetary policy, savers are penalized in order to help borrowers. So if you're a saver, what you can generate now on your savings is minuscule. So what the government has done to your friend is said, okay, look, you can starve trying to live off the interest on your savings, or you can shovel all your money into high-risk assets like equities and junk bonds and real estate. And we'll make those things go up. But of course, those things don't go up in a linear fashion. They go up and then they go down. And so in the next crisis, if your guy does what the government wants him to do and loads up on stocks and junk bonds, he's going to get crushed. So he loses both ways. While he's sitting with his bank accounts and bond funds, he doesn't make enough money to live on. And then when he finally breaks down and shifts into high risk assets, he gets crushed in the next downturn. So people like that are going to be really mad, and with good reason. And so the question is, do they vote for Trump in the hopes that he actually fixes things as he promised he would, or do they go for one of the Democrats who are avowed socialists now, which might be what they end up running? In either way, populism becomes a more viable political philosophy because the system is no longer working for a lot of people. Because remember, right now, for instance, if you're working and you've got a pretty good job and your house is up in value, if you're a working homeowner, you may feel like the system is working for you. But in the next recession, when you get thrown out of your job and your house stops going up and starts going down in value, then you're going to join the ranks of the people who feel like the system isn't working anymore. So then you get real political turmoil. So this next election could be the one where we see that, or the one after that. But that's the trend. We're heading in that direction because there is no way to make a grossly over-indebted system work for most people. That's just not possible, because that debt is so debilitating. You can't grow as fast as you would have otherwise. You're forced to push interest rates way down, so you penalize savers. And then you have a gigantic financial crisis that penalizes everybody, but especially borrowers. So you end up making everybody really angry, and they are willing to vote for people who are outside the mainstream. And then you get outside the mainstream policies, which, by definition are kind of disruptive because they're so brand new. Outside the mainstream financial, economic, and political policies, by definition, involve tearing up the stuff that's in place now. So you get a lot of disruption. So that's what we're headed for. And there's no way to predict how any of this works in its specifics. I mean, you can say there's a gigantic crisis coming because we borrowed too much money, and over leveraging a system always results in some kind of a crisis. But that's really as far as you can go with this stuff. You can't say whether it's going to be a 1930s style deflationary depression where everybody goes bankrupt and defaults into debt, or a Weimar Germany hyperinflation where the money is made valueless by the government as a way of getting out from under their debts. And anybody who saved and trusted the government is basically screwed. We're trying for that outcome, it sounds like. But whether we can achieve it or not is the question. You just can't know when you're this deeply in debt exactly how things are going to go. I
know. There's really no way to know this. But one thing I will say is I think most of the people that voted for Trump are going to vote for him again in this election. I don't see any of them jumping ship because the reasons they voted for him, and really there's only a handful of states that matter in the scheme of things, because everything else will come out pretty much as predicted. So, there's no way he's going to lose Texas. I think the South is pretty much in place. So you're looking at what they were calling the Brexit states, which is Michigan, Pennsylvania, Iowa, Ohio, Minnesota now. That appears to be in play, plus a couple other states. I don't know how socialism is going to play with these guys. What amazes me is about the Bernie bros, the people who are Bernie supporters. They really believe that this guy can win. They are convinced that he has a legitimate shot at becoming president. And to that, I say, maybe that's the case, but he has to get the nomination first. And the establishment of the party are hell-bent on stopping him at any cost, just like they did last time.
Yeah, there's a civil war going on in the Democrat Party, which is really fun to watch. If you're not involved emotionally with any of the candidates, it's really theatrical. And it's not threatening or anything. It's just, wow, look at these people tearing themselves apart.
Yeah.
Did you see the Joe Rogan thing just lately with Bernie Sanders?
He endorsed Joe Rogan. He did a commercial. No, Joe Rogan did a commercial on his podcast for Bernie, right?
Well, Joe Rogan just basically, somebody asked him who he's going to vote for. And he said, I think I'll probably vote for Bernie or something like that. And then Bernie Sanders retweeted or tweeted that little clip out.
Yeah.
And the Democrat establishment went nuts over that because Joe Rogan is he's kind of this a basic guy. He has people on and they just kind of chat and they say dumb things sometimes and they say controversial things other times. And he said some things about the LBG community that some find offensive, but that it was mostly about biological guys being able to compete with women in sports.
Yeah.
Which I think most people probably don't find too offensive. The idea that a trans guy should be able to compete straight up with women, even though the trans guy has male bone structure and male musculature and stuff like that. That's a very debatable thing, and you're not a bigot no matter what side you come down on that, in my opinion.
I think it's ridiculous myself. Honestly, I'll go out on a limb and say, these guys have an unfair advantage and they can self-select, so they can't make it against men. So they'll say, well, we'll go against women instead. But without getting into that whole controversy.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next.
Otis Gold Corp is a gold development and exploration company with quality projects in the pro-mining state of Idaho. Otis's flagship Kilgore project has a resource of 961,000 gold ounces, and its recently published preliminary economic assessment demonstrated an impressive post-tax IRR of 53% at $1,500 gold. In addition to the significant expansion potential at Kilgore, Otis is exploring its highly prospective Oakley project. This Carlin-type gold deposit already has an inferred resource, and previous near-surface drilling intersected 123 meters of 0.69 grams per ton gold. Otis Gold Corp trades in New York under the ticker OGLDF and in Toronto under the ticker OOO. That's triple O. To learn more, go to otisgold.com. That's otisgold.com.
The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Anyhow, the Democratic establishment is this is how they're grasping at straws. They're trying to use this against Bernie Sanders to say that Bernie Sanders is homophobic. And Elizabeth Warren, just before that, tried to paint him as sexist, which, if you go back through this, this guy's like Ron Paul. You can go back to the 1950s when the guy had black hair and he was a young man and he was saying exactly the same stuff that he says right now. And all of it was, gay marriage is something that we have to have, and any woman can become president. He's always been on the right side of these issues from the point of view of the left. Mm-hmm. So he's unassailable from the left, and yet these guys are trying it because that's how desperate they are.
Yeah, they'll do anything.
Keep Bernie Sanders from being nominated because, that half the Democrat Party is totally appalled by the idea of an avowed socialist being their standard bearer. And the other half of the Democrat Party is appalled by the idea of another centrist, from the Clinton-Obama wing of the party. And so they're not going to work for each other, no matter who gets elected or who gets nominated. Half the party is going to be at best unenthusiastic. So, and meanwhile, like you said, Trump has held his base really well. He's got 35% of the vote locked down. And so it comes down to the swing voters, the suburban soccer moms and people like that. The Northern Virginia technocrats, and it'll be really interesting to see how that plays out. And we can't know ahead of time because we really don't know how this Democrat thing is going to shake out.
No idea. Well, yeah. I actually do. I told you I predicted going to be a brokered convention, and none of the current candidates who are purportedly running are going to be in the running, although they might be VP nominees. But it's just none of them can get enough votes. They've actually gotten closer. And then you've got Bloomberg nipping on their heels. He spent, last time we talked, close to $250 million on this insanity. And, I don't think his prospects are good. Bernie's had some issues. One thing I wanted to address, because this deals directly with the debt and how we're going to handle it. which is a big deal. Like, we all know that. But Liz Warren had her Joe the Plumber moment when this guy came up to her and said, oh, you're going to give everyone free college and you're going to forgive all of their student loan debt. And he said, well, I sacrificed. I worked 2 jobs. I didn't go on vacations to have enough money to send my kid to college. And she worked from the time she was 10, saving money. So are you going to give me my money back since I didn't take in any debt? And she said, like, in a moment of truth, of course not. Like, what are you, a moron for asking that? Of course not. I mean, how stupid can a candidate be?
Elizabeth Warren, this is her first big campaign, her first presidential campaign, where she's being asked all these hard questions. And her first reaction is usually the honest one.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you see her mind working and how she can't actually, she has to fix what she just said, and then she tries to take it back. Yeah. So she's not really ready for prime time.
No, that is the point, isn't it?
Yeah, it looked like she would be. But I thought she was the most likely one to be nominated in all of this at the beginning of the process. But she's fading. So now it's Bernie and Biden. And that's a very stark choice.
Yeah, well, but when you look at either one of them, let's just assume they both had, let's assume they both had the same 30%. They're not going to get any more, They're stuck at that. They can't get past that. So that means 70% of the electorate doesn't want them, right?
Well, but remember, Trump has the same issue. He's got his base, but he doesn't poll very well beyond his base right now. Yeah. So somebody has to get those votes, right? And so they're going to run 2. Let's say they do nominate Sanders, and I agree, that's not a probability yet. But if they did, there would be these 2 polarizing candidates that present people with a really stark choice, and that each have 30 or 35% of the vote, but neither of which really appeal to the people in the middle. And that's an interesting election, because how does that play out? Does some third party candidate come in and get 15% of the vote, or do a lot of people just not vote? I don't know how it plays out.
Well,
theatrically, it's going to be fun to watch if it happens.
The one thing you got to realize, Trump has 90 some odd percent of the Republican Party behind him, especially now with the impeachment nonsense. He's got them behind him. So, again, it comes down to those states, those Midwestern states, and none of the policies that the front runners are espousing resonate with a blue collar guy who maybe just got a factory job, because 500,000 of them have returned to the country since Trump took office. He's just gotten that factory job. Now he's back at work. His wife maybe got a job. They're starting to get paychecks coming in. Standard of living is going up. 500,000 of those people in those isolated states, that's enough to turn it all for Trump.
Well, to the extent that the economy is still strong when the election happens, that's really good for the sitting president, just in general, and especially in this circumstance. So that the newly employed might be a block of people that Trump can get, and that might be enough. But remember, you got Sanders speaking directly to the working classes out there. He's not saying, okay, we're going to, actually, he's kind of saying we're going to renegotiate the whole trade thing too, because he is pretty much Trumpian in his trade attitudes. Yeah. So they might cancel each other out on that issue. And then Sanders is offering a ton of free stuff. So if you're struggling, you can't put your kid through college because you can't afford it, and your health care is killing you, and et cetera, on and on. All the stuff that you can't afford just looms large in your mind all day long. And this guy comes along and says, oh, we'll take care of it. We'll give you free this.
We got the solution to all that ails you.
And they have actually, this is from AOC. I don't know if Bernie Sanders is using this terminology yet, but she says, look, don't call it free stuff. Call it public goods. Yeah. Yeah. And that's a nice turn of a phrase that kind of softens the emotional impact of, being on charity or something like that.
Yeah, of course.
It's one thing if people are giving you something. It's another thing if these things are just part of society and everybody has access to them, like the public parks or something. If we just expand that outward, and I think that will resonate. So I don't know.
I don't know, because of course, she's misstating the whole concept of public goods, but we don't need to get into that. Suffice it to say, it's not what she says it is. And, the fact is, public goods that applies to a whole bunch of other publicly sourced provided services like police, like parks, so you can't equate a college loan or college education with a park. So she's got it totally off the wall there, but we don't need to go into that. So Bernie, he'll never have that appeal though to the broader electorate. It's just not going to happen. He's a niche candidate, and he's not going to be the candidate anyway. So when we look at all these factors here, good time to own gold. Do you think the stock market's going to be the recipient of this newfound central bank largesse?
Well, we started with in this talk today, the stock market would be hurt by a disruption in global trade, but it would be helped by even easier money.
Yes.
So we'll see which one of those is the bigger factors going forward. Gold kind of benefits no matter how you slice it, because if the global economy has to partially shut down because people can't travel because of a pandemic, then that level of uncertainty leads you to want to have certainty in whatever aspect of your life where you can impose certainty, right? Mm. And gold and silver are the most certain forms of money. You don't have to worry about the stock market or the bond market continuing to operate. You don't have to worry about whether your bank is open or closed. If you just have some gold and silver on hand, you've got real money, and you've locked down certainty in that one aspect of your life, which is why precious metals do well in times of stress, because people are looking to minimize stress in their lives. So gold would do well if the global economy is disrupted by this virus. And it would also do well if central banks just open the floodgates monetarily in order to combat the effects of this virus. So, not that gold wasn't going to do well anyhow, because we're always headed for really low interest rates, or at least an attempt at lower interest rates in the future because of all the debt we've taken on. So that was always going to happen. And this pandemic might just accelerate the process a bit. So it brings the parabolic rise in gold and silver a couple of years further towards the present from the future. But it doesn't alter the fundamental case for precious metals. We've already baked that into the cake. We borrowed way too much money. We're going to have to try and inflate our ways out of it. And that will be good for sound money. So that's already going to happen. But in any kind of a big disruption, and it doesn't have to be the pandemic. It could be that Middle Eastern war that's always looming out there, or some kind of other environmental thing. A lot of things could happen, and any of them have the same impact. It sends people into safe haven assets, and it sends them into inflation hedges because of the reaction of central banks to the crisis. So all roads lead to precious metals as an investment thesis, which is kind of restful when you think about it. You really, the world could be going crazy out there, and you've got this one thing that you're pretty sure is going to be okay no matter what. And I think that idea will become more and more obvious to more and more people over time.
Yes. Yep. Agreed. Well, interesting times ahead, that's for sure. Hey, one other thing I wanted to mention, they had riots in Hong Kong because the government announced a plan to house people with the virus in public housing. And that just sent things were mellowing in Hong Kong a bit. And that just sent the local people over the barrel, over the edge on that. They just went crazy and rioted over it.
Well, that's how epidemics work, because first you've got this disease, and then you've got this public policy question of where do you put the people who are sick, because the hospitals are overwhelmed and they have to go somewhere. You can't just let them run around if they're hyper contagious, right?
Yeah.
But then any place you put them is near other people who are not going to be happy about it. So you've got that issue to deal with too.
Yeah. They're here. So 20 hours ago, Hong Kong protest against quarantine facilities turns violent. It's in the National Post. And, they were like violent over this. So nothing worse than that to set people off. They were like, the pandemics can make people turn on each other, neighbor against neighbor. You can only imagine. We just have to pray that it doesn't get to that point. Anyways, John, that is it for today. Make sure you check out John's site, dollarcollapse.com. Check out ours, financialsurvivalnetwork.com, and sign up for the newsletter on both our sites, Twitter feed at Kerry Lutz, Facebook page, Financial Survival Network. John, we'll catch up to you next week.
Take care.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.